Dear guests, good evening and Assalamu alaikum. I'm sending a message through this salam of peace to everyone gathered here and beyond. Because each one of us who's going to talk to you today is working for peace and stability in our limited sphere. I am Bushra Hyder from Pakistan. I belong to the city of Peshawar, which is in the northwest province bordering Afghanistan. I run my own school in Peshawar. It has students from age 3 till 18, both girls and boys. In recent years, some 40,000 civilians and around 4,700 security personnel have died as a result of violent extremism, roadside bombs, and frequent drone attacks. My people are suffering from psychiatric disorders in my province and the adjacent federally administered tribal areas. Till 2009, I was a mayor school teacher, teaching my kids. But suddenly, I hopped into jobs which I had never dreamt of because of the changed situation in the country, and particularly my province. Our city was rocked by a bomb blast every day. A new dawn would not bring hope and aspirations, but more deaths, sirens, and breaking news. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been afraid? Perhaps yes, perhaps no. I was afraid. And I saw fear in the eyes of my own children and my students. It's devastating. I saw them drawing dead bodies and shattered houses. Fear is a strange bird. If you let it grapple you, you're lost forever. But if you confront it, it runs away. I made the second choice. But the question was, how to do it? I could not kill it because I didn't know how to shoot. So I had to defeat it with something that I was good at. I started with peace education in the school because the children were badly affected. All the violence around them had taken its toll. In peace education, I prepared my own curriculum, engaged mothers, local madrasas, those are the religious schools, and held interfaith dialogue. And it continues today. I started training with Paiman Trust, which is the biggest organization in Pakistan for conflict transformation and peace building. And under its banner, I have trained parliamentarians, youth, civil society members, and police in conflict resolution, transformation, peace building, and interfaith dialogue. As an entrepreneur, I work with women, youth from conflict areas, develop their skills, and link them with the markets. I work at 3 levels: at the community level, with civil society, and government. I identify problems and do advocacy with the government and concerned departments. I advocated for the inclusion of peace education in the provincial curriculums. Although Peace education is not included. Pictures showing men holding guns or swords are removed from the textbooks. On the title pages, peace messages are printed, and support material for peace education was made compulsory. For the last 4 years, I have been advocating for police reforms and increasing the number of women in the security sector. The government finally agreed, and in 2 districts of my province, more women were recruited. And before coming here, I conducted training with police officers in early warning, early response, and community policing. I consider myself as a bridge between the community and the government, and to try find novel ways of moderating extremism in Pakistan. Today, all of us women are not here to show you how wonderful we are, or to make you feel sorry for us. We are here to tell you that after listening to us today, just when you go back home, only ponder. And whenever you hear or see any kind of violence or atrocity, don't remain silent, but hate it and condemn it. Teach your children values of love, compassion, and peace. My daughter told me today that my son did not eat his lunch in school because he was afraid that the extremists would attack his school today because of the incident that had taken place a few weeks ago in Pakistan, and that's my province and my city. If it is my son today, it could be anybody's child tomorrow in any other part of the world. Let us make a circle, not of our hands, but of our hearts, and show it to those who resort to violence that our hearts beat with the same rhythm, no matter in which corner of the world we are. Thank you.
Junior Forum. I'm Maggie Williams, Director of the Institute of Politics at Harvard University. Tonight, we discuss the challenges that weigh increasingly on women and girls worldwide, threatening their equality, their well-being, and very survival, the challenges facing women who are living in theaters of war. Our discussion will be led by Ambassador Swanee Hunt, an international public policy leader with long experience working with women in war zones, helping them engage in the processes of peace to reclaim their country and their lives. Ambassador Hunt is the Eleanor Roosevelt Lecturer in Public Policy here at the Harvard Kennedy School. Also at the Harvard Kennedy School, she was founder and director of the Women in Public Policy program and is senior advisor to the Initiative to Stop Human Trafficking at the Carr Center for Human Rights. She also is the founder and the chair of the Washington-based Institute of Inclusive Security, which works to involve women in peace processes. Now, from 1993 to 1997, Ms. Hunt served as U.S. Ambassador to Austria, where she worked to help stabilize neighboring Balkan states, integrate women into the peace process there, and promote women leaders throughout Eastern Europe. In 1997, she launched Vital Voices, Women in Democracy, an international conference that became a State Department program led by then Secretary of State Albright and First Lady Hillary Clinton, and it is now a thriving NGO. Now, just a personal point of reference here. Over the years, I have been fortunate, but my mother would say blessed, to have had the friendship and the encouragement of this brilliant, wonderful woman, Swanee Hunt, whom I admire so greatly and from whom I have learned so much. I am deeply honored to present Ambassador Swanee Hunt.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you. Maggie, I was hoping you would say that at the end, because if you hadn't, if you just made this long list of stuff I've done, I would have still said one of my great claims to fame is to be a friend of Maggie Williams and to be a fan of yours, yeah. Bushra, thank you very much. You know, we've been together for, actually over the years, several times, and you were saying yesterday in our class, which is called Inclusive Security, you were saying something about it got so bad that the girls were going home and they were tearing the arms and legs off their dolls, and that will stay with me so long. And that in the schools, they were drawing pictures of dead bodies in ambulances. You know, your kids were, that's how we can know in the most basic graphic terms what shall I say, what is happening to the whole city when you see it through the eyes of the children, not just the whole city, but in a way the country, but the world, really. And Bushra, thank you for understanding that and for saying, I will lean forward. I will lean forward into this. And that, I think, is the way I would describe the women who are here. I think more than anything else, I would say that there's catastrophe in the world, right? And there's catastrophe, and there's some people who shrink back, and there are other people who lean forward, and you all are the forward leaners. We've got 6 extraordinary women that you'll hear from. You heard from Bushra, there are 4 of us, 4 now, and another to come. And they're part of a whole group. There are more than 20 women from around the world who've gathered. And some are from government, and by government I mean a former presidential candidate, pioneering diplomat who's represented her country in about 5 different countries, a sitting senator, former ministers. But on the other hand, we also have the civil society represented, and that's the key here, is to have that balance. So you've got women here who have been putting pressure as constitutions are being written. They've been part of that. They've been pressuring the government to live up, to be accountable to what they say they're going to do to stabilize their region. We have example after example. I don't want to steal people's thunder here. But you know, these women, they don't just start doing this work and you know things just roll along. I mean, they pay an extraordinarily high price. And I feel honored to be with you. Some of you have been jailed, have been tortured. You've lost the custody of your children. The women among us here in this week, some of them have watched their friends being shot in a peaceful demonstration. They watched people standing in line with them being, you know, to go through a checkpoint, being shot in the head, you know, short, you know, range, and I mean, it is extraordinary what they live with now. Some have been in exile for 2 years or 2 decades. Tough prices they've paid, but you know, they are not essentially victims. Of course they've been victimized, but these are survivors. That's my point. They take their experiences and they make out of that the steel inside of them to lean forward, as I said, into conflict and to say, I will do something about this and I'll bring others with me. So this is what we mean when we say inclusive security. You know, security isn't about you get 6 warlords together and they put their guns under the table and one says, I'll take the diamonds, you can have the timber, you can have the, you know. the oil, and we're going to sign this agreement. Now, actually, in the back of my mind, I hope the agreement doesn't last because I really don't like having to give you the diamonds. I want the diamonds. So, and that's not security. Security comes when you bring the various stakeholders together. And, you know, some of you have experiences that need to be represented at the table. You have perspectives. You'll reach across the aisles. You're less threatening than a lot of the men who are out there saying, you know, being very aggressive about we're going to prevail, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why we're going to hear now. I'm going to stop talking, thank you. I know what's on your minds. But the women that you're going to hear from, some of them are in the hot war of Syria, and that's Amal Shami, who until recently led one of the largest underground women's organizations in Syria. Some are fighting political battles in Brazil. Jacqueline Pitangi, a former cabinet official, you'll tell us more about that. NGO activist. I have to tell you, she was introduced to me. Do you mind my saying it? She was introduced to me by someone else as being the Gloria Steinem of Brazil. I love that. Thin Aung, she's working with the ethnic battles that have claimed lives for 60 years in what we think of as Burma or Myanmar. She's a democracy activist. She's the founder of this multi-ethnic Women's League of Burma. But you all, I mean, I can go on and you know, give notes from a bio, but this is a woman who has paid an enormously high personal price. And I hope that you can talk about that without people thinking, oh, poor Tintin, you know? Because it makes you who you are. And Martha, thank you for being with us. I am honored to be with Martha. She is the former minister presidential candidate. People call her the Iron Lady of Kenya. I mean, you really don't want to get into a dark alley with this woman. So I'm going to stop talking. I promised them I would stop talking. And let me ask you all to tell us about your work, tell us about your past, your present, your hopes. You know, what are you doing now?
Well, maybe I'll start.
Okay.
My work is a work in progress. I mean, I feel that I'm always working because I work with human rights and women's rights, and this is never done. This is never done because rights are conquests, are political conquests. They are written with the pen of struggle, with the pen of political negotiation, and there are backlashes all the time. But when I was still in school, there was a military coup in Brazil, and a dictatorship was installed for 21 years. And from the very first moment of dictatorship, my family was against, because I was raised with the values of justice, of freedom, a very liberal family, committed really to social justice. And these principles are part of my life. And with them, I had to walk against an arbitrary stating that was committing violences, disrespecting basic political and civil rights. And I was, as a student, marching on the street, but then, as I became a young adult, I was already strategizing, and yes, I lived with fear. I've known fear. Fear has been part of my life, but has not paralyzed me. And I have been also part of a diaspora, going here and there, living in Europe and Chile, but always working for the reinstallment of democratic principles. However, in the course of this, I started to perceive that there was something else. It was not only the right to vote, free elections, etc. There was something else. Women were a second-class citizen in Brazilian society, and we could not think of democracy not placing on it, not as a marginal to be resolved afterwards, but as a central issue of democracy, gender equality. And that's how feminism came into my life. And I became also an activist for women's rights. And then I was indicated.
What's an activist for women's rights?
Well,
Right.
it's someone that it's always first denouncing inequalities towards women. The fact that women earns less than men.
Yeah.
The fact that women in our legislation was placed as a secondary in the household, etc. I mean, there are many, the fact that when a violence was committed against women, it was not perceived as a crime in society. And so we started to have an agenda that was more complex.
Yeah.
Fighting for democracy, but qualifying democracy.
Right.
Democracy also meant gender equality. And that then took me from the streets.
Yeah.
I was not member of a political party. I was appointed by women's movements throughout the country to be the president of the National Council for Women's Rights. There was a cabinet position, and I was nominated by the president. And for 4 years, I learned how to use power, but I also, with all the women that were with me, because this is always a collective, really a collective work, we have been able to be protagonists maybe on the most important political moment of our country, which was the democratization and the rewriting of a new constitution. And I must say that we celebrate that 80% of women's demands, from labor rights to social benefits, to the recognition of reproductive rights, to the recognition of the duty of the state to combat violence, interfamily violence, to maternal rights.
Right.
They are included in our constitution, 80%.
Wow.
Why do I keep working? Because as I said, human rights are always subject to backlashes. Nothing is really assured where we walk. And so we see the backlashes, we are living backlashes, so here we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Working again.
Really inspiring. Really inspiring. And yeah.
Kenya has similarities to Brazil. Ours has been a journey to review our constitution, a 20-year journey, and my call to leadership came as a young lawyer when I realized that the political environment is what determined the environment I lived in and worked in. So I felt called upon to step in and demand that the government expands the democratic space. And together with others, we were propelled to leadership. I became a leader in the Law Society. And when our laws were changed to accommodate plural democracy, I ran for a position as a member of parliament. I was re-elected 4 times actually. We have 5-year terms, so I was a member of parliament for 20 years. In the course of that, I got appointed to cabinet as Minister for Water, and I remember not being too happy to be appointed Minister for Water and sulking for 6 hours. Then I realized I was actually being silly and not seeing the opportunity it presented me to serve my nation at that level. I styled up, found out all I needed to about water, and realized I could change the lives of women. I knew water intimately in the sense that, like most girls in Kenya, I had fetched water in the river. I may not have traveled long distances. There are women in Kenya who travel over 12 miles to fetch water, and that means the whole day. So I took up the work in the ministry with all the passion I could, and for 3 years I implemented the water sector reforms, making the water delivery and governance more inclusive and more transparent. Before I could finish the reforms in water or take them to a level I felt was comfortable, I was moved to the Ministry of Justice. And then we went to elections, and there was a dispute over the presidential election, leading to bloodshed, where more than 1,300 people lost their lives, and over 600,000 were displaced.
Wow.
It necessitated negotiations between the government and the opposition. I was appointed to lead the negotiations on the government side. I had already been reappointed Minister for Justice. We negotiated and came up with a grand coalition government. This helped us to achieve what we had been unable to achieve for a long time, because with a government that included the majority of parliamentarians, we were able to enact a new constitution. I feel happy that I was supervising or overseeing the laws that helped us to achieve that constitution. But before the constitution could be delivered, I resigned on principle, but I was able to participate as a member of parliament in the making of the constitution. For 20 years, while struggling for the Kenyan constitution, we were also struggling for recognition as women. And I want to say that most conflicts in many countries, including Kenya, are over resources and marginalization. As women, we felt excluded, we felt marginalized. Like Brazil, we achieved getting space in the constitution, firstly in the laws that were guiding the constitution review, and our rights were taken on board the new constitution. I felt that having been in the process for that long and understanding the constitution the way I did, having been with the process from the beginning, I could do more for my country, and I therefore decided to run for president. I ran for president. I did not get the vote, a little disappointed, but I said, after all the 4 times I had been elected, somebody lost. So losing once, I shouldn't complain too hard. So I say to myself, I'm not done yet. I'll have a go at it another time.
Bravo.
So I've been reflecting.
It sounds like there are a lot of people here who'd like to vote for you. Right.
Yes.
For me, Martha, we in the country I came from, in Syria, we have the same struggle you had, but the struggle in Syria accompanies us in very extraordinary situations. For me, I grew up in an environment surrounded by the big brother is watching you. And this continues in my life, whatever, during the whole stages I went through. You can't do anything. You dare not speak a word against the government. You can't lead the life you want to. Until 2011, March 2011, when the revolution started, I found myself in the streets with a group of other girls who came from the same background that I came from. Many of them had family members who spent 23 years of their lives in prisons under the accusation of confronting the regime or belonging to any other political party which did not exist, but the claim that they were trying to have a political party during the regime of Al-Ba'ath Party, the ruling party. 23 years, and we have people imprisoned underground, and we were stepping over their heads when they are in basements, and we are leading our normal life, not knowing what these people are doing. After 23 years, some of them were released. They can't lead their normal life. They can't go to bed. They can't have lunch because they are not accustomed to having lunch as we normal people do, or going to bed as we normal people go.
What do you mean by going to bed?
Like they can't go to sleep in beds because
they can't sleep on beds.
They used to do this action for 23 years on the ground, sleep, stay, to have food or to continue their lives. When the revolution started, I found my chance to create the change that we were aiming to. Me and other friends founded a group to tell other people that we have our voices, same like other people in the world, to say no and to create the change that we aspire for. We deserve to live the life that other people in other parts in the world are leading. We have the right to have democratic life, to have political parties, and to have our own voices heard. With the aid of these enormous girls, we started to organize the demonstrations, tell the rest of the Syrians that we have rights. Let us say no against the tyrants. During these demonstrations, we confronted the intelligence forces. We took the risk to go outside my town and get the information, discuss with each other, share the experience we have, and return back, find another groups of other ignorant women, other ignorant girls, and convey to them the information we have regarding human rights and women's rights so that they can participate in the life and in the politics later on.
Amal, now let me understand. So you and other women, when you said you went outside the town, you mean you went to somebody's home outside, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
because we worked under very secret conditions.
I
That
see.
We dare not go.
I see.
We dare not meet in one house.
Got it.
So we took the risk to go to the capital
Yeah.
and
To Damascus?
to
Yeah,
Damascus.
right. Uh-huh.
and to gather there in some of our friends' house.
I see.
Which is less risky than gathering in my town, in my city.
Yeah, and your city is?
Daria.
Daria. Okay, so then you would go back to your home city.
And we worked in groups,
Yeah.
little groups, like we were 10 in number.
Yeah,
So we have to find another 10 girls,
yeah,
teach them,
yeah,
or convey to them the knowledge or the skills we have.
yeah.
And then these 10 girls or women
Yeah.
have to take the lead and teach another 10
Got
girls.
it, got it.
So the information spreads in a
Yeah.
very safe way. And
Yeah.
we are not caught by the intelligence forces.
So there was like these rings of 10,
Just
right?
spreading
And
all
this is,
over the place.
yeah, well, yeah.
Like cancer, you know, but this
Well,
is
well, let's
a
not go
good
there.
type,
go
type
there,
of
go there,
cancer
yeah.
or tumor.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Moving along.
moving,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So when we started to do this, like things were somehow safer,
Yeah,
but things started to change immediately. The regime started to bombard my town, and then the regime forces broke into my town. They committed a massacre. They killed 1,000 people in 3 days.
wow.
Hundreds of people were just missing or arrested. We don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
So we found ourselves in a situation like human rights do nothing for these people.
Right.
We have to do something urgent. We started to teach them something related to first aid.
Yeah.
And again, we spread in the same cluster way.
Right.
We teach other girls, and these girls teach other girls.
Right.
Now we are in need to save lives. We are not in need for human rights at that stage.
Yeah.
So if I teach one girl, stop the bleeding,
Yeah.
it saves a life.
Yeah.
And if I speak for hours about human rights, it does nothing.
Right. Right.
And then we started to work with those little kids who lost their fathers and now they are traumatized.
Yeah.
We took the risk under the shelling, under the risk of being confronted by the intelligence forces. We took these little kids to one of my friend's kindergarten, and we started to play with them, shout with them, be crazy, be
Right,
mad,
right.
and shout when the sound of the bombardment and shelling over our heads, just to let them feel that there is life
Yes.
behind the death that they have seen.
No, it's interesting
and
what
witnessed.
Bushra was saying earlier about her work with the kids, and it sounds like you all really connected, not because you know how to run a kindergarten, but rather because you see the life through the eyes of those children.
They are the future.
Yeah, yeah.
They are the future that we are counting upon.
Right, right.
After that, the regime broke into my town after 2 months, and we were first to leave our houses. We were 300,000 people. All of us left the town at the same moment. Only 6,000 people left in the town, and now they are besieged. And they can't find their food even, or they can't find something to heat themselves up with. And being internally displaced, I experienced very difficult times in a farm far away from all types of life. I found myself with 173 people all together. We have to survive there with 25 kids who need diapers, formula, and who need anything to let them continue their life. I took the risk after a couple of days because I was myself traumatized by losing my house and losing contact with my friends and losing contact with all life. I was helpless. Only 2 days, I have to take the decision, take the risk, go back to Damascus, collect the money, return back, buy the diapers, buy the formula for the kids, buy some blankets, not to sleep on the floor in November 2012 when the weather was not cold but freezing. 2 months later, me and the group of the girls continue going back to my town, breaking the fear of the regime that we can confront. We have the courage to return back and demonstrate and cook for the people who stayed in the country, smuggle medicine, smuggle camcorders for them to convey the reality and convey the situation they are living in. For our bad luck, one of my friends got caught at one of the checkpoints. And only then, the security forces got to know that we are the group of activists working, confronting the regime. She was taken to prison, a married woman of three children. Her husband was taken also. Her mom was arrested also by regime, and her 3 kids were taken to prison for 24 hours. Now the husband is killed under torture. The 3 kids were released after 24 hours, but till this moment, they are traumatized because of the bad moments they witnessed inside the walls of the prisons of Al-Assad regime. She was released after 7 months. And another 2 girls were entrapped by her mother, and they were taken to prison also. At that moment, I have to leave my Damascus. I have to leave my family behind me, all my memories, all the dear things that I grow up with, and be a refugee in other country having no rights or no dignity because I'm a stranger. I took the decision, or no, it's not me who took the decision. The rest of the group take the decision that we either leave the country or go to prison. And then they decided that if we are in prison, nothing will change. If we are outside the country, we can create the change that we can. To tell you the truth, I spent 1 month helpless, thinking of my mom, whom I might never see her again. And it took me as a year and a half to reunite with my mother. That's all. I'm lucky I reunited with my mom. Other people spend their lives waiting the moment to return back and be reunited with their families.
Right, right, right. You know, this whole business about when you go, when you stay, when you go. I mean, you know, Tintin, you told me a similar story. I mean, but it was decades earlier. And I watched you in our home. I watched you and Amal, and I kept thinking about the same struggle, but but just 2 decades separating you.
Yeah, after hearing Ahmad, it's very much reminding, my country's situation, like, killings, tortures, imprisonment, refugees, IDVs, and military intelligence everywhere. Same situation we face. For me, is if I say my story, like, it's my country also that the General Ne Win, who took military coup in 1962. Since then 1962, then till after 26 years in 1988. So the people of Burma, we found that everything is being ruined and deteriorating. Then once our country was very rich in Southeast Asia, is becoming one of the least developed country announced by United Nations in 1986. So then we were very unhappy, and also the students were really upset for the UN in the education system. Then that the trigger moment, because in 1987, that he again made stupid decision, like he just stopped all the notes, currency note, Burmese currency note. Well, we cannot use anymore. 45 just notes, 90 notes, 75 notes. Then it's really about students started leading the demonstration against the regime. Then it's the 1988. The student leader called this nationwide democracy uprising on 8 August 1988. That is a 88 movement. Then I really never waited to join this movement. I also never liked this injustice, and also in my life, I always fight. Within the family also, I used to be rebel against all the, the control.
Why am I not
against
surprised?
it. So that's why, even though my family is military family, my father was from Air Force, and also my brother is from Army. But they wanted to try to control me, but I never, I really resisted. So then I joined it without telling my parents, and I was on the street since that day. Every day we were asking for the multi-party democracy system. We against the one-party dictatorship rule. But, it's again another military coup, and also it happened in September 1988. So on that date, military government announced on radio that no more demonstration, otherwise they were cracked down.
Right.
This really happened. So on next day, on 19th September 1988, I was also there with the big thousands of people, students, very young high school student also there, military, medical student were there. We marched, and also we again asked for democracy. But this military government gave a shooting order, and that soldiers really hiding in the place like the top of the Union Bank, and also really shooting, directing the students. Then I also survived. I can say that I had to also run away like the other students, die on the street in my eyes. There's a very young girls from high schools really holding the flag, but she just on the spot died with all the blood. Then suddenly we really, the military crackdown was too brutal. On that day, we heard that estimated 3,000 students died on the spot. Then after that, I just quietly, going back home in the evening, very late evening, and my mother was very worried. And she also warned me that, that he will shoot that General Ne Win, because she knew that what happened after 1962.
Right.
So, but I just quietly stayed for some few days, but I decided that, this is this movement. We have to continue this against injustice, because my elder brother also came back from other town, and we started a fight. I really argued with my brother. Why did you guys shoot this unarmed, peaceful children?
Right.
As he just say cold-heartedly, and also he said, but this in military, this order, if the army officer above have to give order to shoot, then we have to shoot. So this, and I was so angry with him. Oh, you guys did not have a brain, whether to shoot or not. They have no arm, and also not in the battle. On the street of Rangoon, it's very peaceful without an arms. So then we started fighting with my brothers, and of course my family did not support my activism. So I just did not tell, and I, like she said, I was also, did not tell my parents and stay and sleep with my friend's home and did not come back. So they did not, know that I was planning to leave the country.
Right.
Because I decided, because of that moment is my turning point, I just left a note written to my mother. I'm going to join a revolutionary and start an armed struggle, because I thought that we will not win with the peaceful demonstration to this brutal regime. So that I left a note with my friends to give my mother. After 2 days, I left. But I thought that it would take maximum 5 years. We will come back with the victory.
Right.
But it took 23 years. I left in 1988, so I could come back only in 2012, early 2012. I was in India, actually. I went into exile in India. Actually, I wanted to come with military training, and we expected the support from Indian government to liberate us like they did in Bangladesh in 1971.
Right.
So, but that's never happened. Actually, I had to live in a refugee camp. Suddenly, I just learned the word refugees, but I never, learned the refugee word when in my life in Rangoon. But I didn't want to be called refugee. I just we are revolutionary, not refugee. But of course, I landed in 2 years in the camp in the border town.
Right.
Only ration of food and shelter were given by the Indian government. Then I decided to leave the camp in 1990. I went to New Delhi city, and then I became an official refugee recognized by UNHCR office, But I continued my movement while in India. Then suddenly I found that not only, democracy is the, issue.
Right.
Then I met this different ethnic, well, for your information, there's 135 different ethnic groups in Myanmar.
135?
Right? Yes, official.
Yeah.
So, but I also did not know that, those ethnic people hate Burmese, majority like me.
Yeah.
Because I belong to the Burman majority
Right,
ethnic group in Burma. And I never learned this in my college. But suddenly I faced this when I saw, all the tribal people, ethnic
Right,
people from the
right.
border area. Oh, they didn't like, and also they used to call the, not government army, they just Burmese army.
Right.
So I just found
you're
that.
in exile. You're just over the border in India. You're in a refugee camp, and then you hate being called a refugee because you're a revolutionary. You go to Delhi, and the UN says yes, you're an official refugee, and, et cetera. And then you start trying to figure out how to organize. You see all these different tribal groups, and you start bringing them together.
Yes.
Right.
Then I found that there's more women refugee camp and children camp. Then we really there is a need for women, and also women have to be empowered and to be part of this democracy and peace movement, and also reconciliation. Because as I mentioned, that different ethnic equality issue is also the biggest. Actually, I can mention that the 60 years of civil war. You can imagine this, the longest civil war in the world. Burma had. So since independence, 1948. So that is the thing that we organize women from different ethnic groups. And that time I was in India. The same like me, there are other women's activists went to Thailand, Bangladesh, and China, all the border area. Yeah. So we started, knowing each other. Oh, there are also women organizing there. So that I know internet available. Just wrote a letter and took time to send.
Right.
And also they also read that, okay, we exchange the information. Why don't we meet? Then we try to meet for the first time in Thailand, Burma border. Then we came to, form the Women's League of Burma, which is an umbrella organization with different women, ethnic groups together. And also we really made a strong voice in the exile political movement. So this is the, thing that for peace building and reconciliation, I think women can make it, because we, as Burman, Karen, Kachin, Shan, like different ethnic women together, fighting, working together for the common cause. Yeah. And we, learn each other, and we build trust and also friendship. So that from that, I think we can change, the situations towards a more lasting peace. I mean, this is the lasting peace. This is the women.
Tintin, so you were organizing all these women, all different countries, all different ethnic groups. And do you have any sense of how many women were involved in all of your organizing?
Oh, it's a Women's League of Burma. It's 13 different ethnic women
Right,
organizations.
right, right.
It's one women organization has more than 30,000 membership.
Yeah.
For example, Karen Women's Group.
Right.
So
and so then the borders open and you all go in, right?
yes, now because of the door opened up
Right.
in 2012, little
Right.
changes. Then I came back.
Right.
Then what happened is many activists like me could not come back home till now.
Right.
So, but I just took a chance to get back, and also I created a network bridging women from inside and outside women group,
Right,
activists. So that is a kind of networking.
Yes.
Now we started working with the women from inside the country
Yeah.
and also outside.
But see, this is really key in these situations with the post-conflict time. There's so much fragmentation. Really, the society starts just falling apart, and then you come in, you've already organized from outside, you come in, you organize the inside and the outside, and that becomes an extremely important glue, Tintin. As people come up to ask questions now, I'm going to add, Bushra, will you come back up? And we have one more, Pastor Esther. Let me introduce you very briefly. I'm going to actually trade places over here. You sit over here where I've been. I'm going to sit over here, and because I want to very much hear the kinds of questions you all have. If you'll come up to the mic and join this conversation, we would love to have you. As you're coming up to the mic, let me introduce Esther Ibanga, and she's in northern Nigeria with Boko Haram. This is the stories that bring back our girls, and this is the real deal, and I'd love for you all to hear more about how she's been organizing there. But seriously, you all come join this conversation. There are microphones set up. Yes, please.
Good evening.
And identify yourself,
Sure,
and as you know, the rules here are that questions end with a question mark. Right?
My name is Nicolas. I am from France and I'm a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School. I'm also the co-founder of the Future Society here at the Kennedy School, which is a student club. Mm-hmm. And my question is to Mrs. Amal from Syria. I found it very interesting how you leverage the power of women to self-organize and combat in a form. And without exposing yourself and your comrades, because most of the military intelligence officers are generally men, most of them, what kind of advantage, I would say, tactical advantage, did you draw from the fact that you self-organize as women vis-a-vis a male-dominated intelligence service?
How could we deal with this?
Was there a certain advantage being a woman, given
Yes,
that the
sure.
intelligence services and the military were men?
The first advantage is, I come from a culture that it's a taboo to violate a woman. So they counted to 10 and before they arrest a woman, but now they violate all of us. It was at the very beginning when things were very slow. This is the first advantage, that we took the risk that when we meet 10 girls, we're doing nothing, we're just having coffee. But when 10 men meet, they are conspiring against the government. Mm-hmm. This is the first advantage. The second example that could broaden or make the picture more clear, now in the besieged areas, when I mean besieged, there are cities encircled by the regime forces. They don't let the people out or in the cities or the towns. And in one of the besieged areas, if a man tries to cross the checkpoints, he will get arrested under the pretext he is a terrorist or supporting the terrorists. And by the terrorists, they are the definition of the regime forces calling any person, for any person calling for democracy or freedom. So women took the risk to cross these checkpoints to bring food to their children, from Damascus and they return back to the besieged areas, and they are not asked by the security forces why you came out or in, because they will say that we have children to feed.
Yeah.
Did you feel pressure in performing that? Sorry, it's a very quick.
That's fine.
Did you feel pressure from other women who might have felt exposed by this kind of new approach and men in how you were crossing the boundary? I'm not sure I'm clear, but did you feel pressure in doing that from other women?
Pressure to do what? How?
Other women.
Yes, because she was using the fact that she was a woman as an advantage to get into the city, and the moment the military intelligence would discover that would probably be more harsh to women.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, did you feel this pressure, or it was?
Yes. Like at the very beginning, when women started to take this risk and cross the checkpoints to bring food and sometimes medicine to the besieged areas or to other like the areas that the regime bombards or bombs every day. When the regime discovered that, they started to search women, like they started to check them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is of course just a small symbol of so much more in terms of the violence against women. You know, Amal, as our colleagues at the Institute for Inclusive Security have told me about the work that they're doing with coaching women leaders, et cetera, across the border in Turkey. They've been talking to me about these women are so brave. They come through the checkpoints to get to these courses and these workshops. And now hearing you, I have, I mean, look, my understanding is this big, right? But at least it's much more vivid to me what you're describing in terms of the risk that women have taken to go across the border to these workshops and gatherings for the coaching. I feel very humbled by this. Thank you. Yes, hi.
Privileged to be among all of you great ladies. I'm Pushpi. I coordinated the Reconciliation Secretariat for the Sri Lankan President. And my question is specifically for Bushra. In terms of our peace education, what can we do as Kennedy School students, and of course in the capacities we've come from back home, for you to spread the education? What can we do? How can we help?
Well, you can come up with new ideas or maybe even topics, because there are certain topics which are given in our religious studies book, but I wanted to come up with something different for the students, because if they're studying the same thing again and again, they get bored with it. So I started with diversity as a topic, which they had never thought about it. So I would suggest that if you can come up with something new, maybe more activities that you can send to me, or I'm presently working with Catherine Phillox, which is a US-based playwright, and I'm working with her on a play which is about the effect of conflict on children, and I intend to stage it here in the US and both in my own country. So if I can get the space, I can bring in my children and they can perform that stage play here.
So after we're finished with this session, if people want to find out how to email you, they can
Yes,
come up
I can give them my email address.
Okay. Do you want to do it right now?
Yeah, it's bushrakadeen@yahoo.com, and I'm on the Facebook.
Wait, that way. Slow it down. Slow it down. Bushra.
Kadeem, it's QADEEN @yahoo.com.
At yahoo.com.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'm on the Facebook also.
Okay. Thanks,
So
Bushra.
I'm open to all kinds of suggestions. If you have anything new, you can always find me.
Great. Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Sylvia. I'm a senior at the college. My question goes to the panel in the terms of peacekeeping and peace building after conflict.
Yes.
So it seems that women are instrumental in the transition towards peace, but it seems that these groups and these trainings are consolidated after conflict. Once a peace agreement is reached, don't transition well into a peace, into the time of peace, so to speak. So how is it that these groups, these trainings can transition to become part of the democratization process, can become a part of the transition process after conflict.
Okay, so the question is, after the conflict is over, how can women come in and shape and stabilize the situation?
Yes, and just continue the work that they've been doing before to reach the, what happens after a conflict.
Can you all give an example,
I
Jacqueline?
just wanted to come into this discussion of peace and conflict because I think that conflict is part of the history of humanity. I mean, there's always conflict. There's conflict because there's conflict between nations, but there's conflict in the homes, there's conflict in the streets. Conflict is part of living together. I think when we talk about peace is how do we solve conflict? That's exactly what we're talking about. How do we solve conflict? Using violence, imposing, dominating, destroying, or using diplomacy, negotiation. And then I think comes a very important ingredient, and I think it goes in the direction of what you asked, which is discussing peace today. We have to include violence against women. I think we have to include violence and domestic violence also on any conversation about solving conflicts and about peace. And I think that the Vienna Conference of 1993 on human rights made it very explicit that violence against women is a human rights violation. And so I think that we have enlarged the concept of peace, and we have included there some ingredients to negotiate, one of them being gender equity and gender equality. Otherwise, how can you negotiate if you're so unequal? And so I think that we're dealing now with a much more complex, because we are recognizing the complexity of the world and the complexity of the conflicts. So I really think
If
that
I may,
Yes, please,
if
Martha.
I may add, I think that inclusive and transparent governance is the first step towards inclusive security. I said earlier that most conflicts are about resources and exclusion. So once everybody is at the table, you actually are building peace as opposed to waiting for when there's conflict for you to start resolving. In Kenya, the 2010 constitution, which is our new constitution, includes women in all stages of governance, in elected positions, in appointed positions, everywhere in public life. Women have to have 1/3. Other marginalized groups are also recognized and given slots. How well we implement the law now is what will define whether we can have sustainable peace. So like my colleague here said in the beginning, society and everyday life is dynamic. So you finish this issue, a new issue arises. It is important to have everybody at the table as a foundation for inclusive security.
Well, you convinced me. Yes, sir.
Also, I think I want to add one about the transitional justice, because during the wartime and armed conflict, and the women suffered most. It's human rights violations. It's everybody, men and women and children, but for women, it's sexual violence and conflict is a really, really big issue. So that after this transitional period, or after the conflict, I think so this issue has been tackled. Otherwise you have to recognize this sexual violence and conflict against women, and we have to do this justice to women. Then only we can move on. And of course, the women, it has to be in decision-making level. Without women at the decision-making power, and these kind of human security issue will not be included in their peace agreement, a ceasefire agreement.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like you, I've studied transitional justice, which means that after horrific genocide or massacres or whatever, the court system isn't set up to deal with that, the regular court system. So that you've got to have this transitional time. And of course, the classic is the Nuremberg tribunals after World War II, but then another classic is South Africa, which said, well, we're going to have a reconciling process, not a retributive one. And women, people don't know this story, but women have played a key role, because often the men didn't want to come and say, oh, well, I was victimized in this way and that way, because, you know, they're men. They didn't want to talk about the bad things that happened to them. And so the women would actually come and say, here's what happened to my brother. Here's what happened to my son. Very, very interesting how they became the majority of the witnesses, as well as many, many of the judges. So these systems actually, in terms of setting up a non-corrupt government, women play a key, an essential role, because they don't seem to be as corruptible, most women, as men. But don't quote me, because I'll deny I said that. Okay? Yes, sure.
My name is Devobroto. I am from Bangladesh, neighbor to Myanmar or Burma. I'm a mission fellow and an MPA student here. So my question to Ms. Thin, since you are working, you have worked in Delhi as in exile or as a refugee, whatever term you may prefer. You also know that you have lot many Northern Arakan refugees in Bangladesh. Some are officially registered and lot many are not. So what are you thinking of their women and their girls and their children in both sides of the border? What are you thinking? Because we can see only one view of the picture, but not the other parts of the border. What are you thinking organizing by yourself or your organization? Just wanted to know your reflection. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. And as I mentioned, about 13 different ethnic women organizations is part of our Women's League of Burma. So which include the Rakhine Women's Union, which is based in Bangladesh-Burma border. So that we have separated the work at the different border area. Then there's also organized the same thing in the women in that Bangladesh. So that is information we got, and this also at the meeting of the WLB, we always hear this, that they are helping the refugees and children in that area.
You know,
just
please.
1 second. Sorry to interrupt. The problem is the government is not recognizing them to take them back, and we have not heard anything from the civil society in Burma or the other organizations like you to take them back. I mean, do you have any thought to take them back? Because you know that refugee is not a happy life. Whatever term you can call, nobody is happy to become a refugee. And I have seen that. I worked as a camp officer in refugee camp for some months, and I have seen them personally. That's why it's a human appeal, not for them or for its global affairs. So any thought from your organization to take them back?
Well, if I am a government, I think maybe I have a decision to take them back. But you know that there's also the border area, like the Thai-Burma border area, India-Burma border area. There's a cross-border refugee and IDB and all things like that. And also the same ethnic group also live in the cross-border. And also the language speaking, the same ethnic in both the country. In also India, I saw that the Chin people, same, so in the Indian government also, they don't recognize. This is a government-to-government issue also there, immigration issue also there. So that, of course, for refugees, we all have to, these refugees, if they willing to come back their home, they should come back their home willingly, but not forced to go back home if they are not safe situation. But before they can come back, there should be some safe, repatriation, this housing, food, and all the shelter. The issue have to be also so prepared for them to come back safely and with dignity with the home.
Well, I'm just thinking about how in the U.S. we have been facing the same issue of masses of children who have come across the border, and no one can figure out, should they be staying here? Should they be forced to go back? And this really isn't about Bangladesh. It really isn't about Myanmar. It's about all over the world. And Tintin, I want to underscore what you said, that if you were the minister of whichever, that you would make sure to solve this problem of the children. I think maybe that's a good idea for you to become the minister. Yeah? But I think we need to figure that out. Yeah, let's figure that one out. What do you think? Where am I? Yusra?
There.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your inspiring words and your work with us. My question is for the pastor. Before I say more, I'll say that I'm Yusra. I study religion and politics at Harvard Divinity School, and I work at the mayor's office on faith-based engagement as a way of doing violence prevention in the city. Pastor, I wanted to ask you, I've heard you speak about your work in both the Christian and Muslim communities. How do you go about influencing hearts and minds as you do this work when they're so, the conflict is so entrenched in ideologies and deeply seated religious beliefs?
Thank you very much for that question. I think the first thing is to convince yourself about your sincerity for doing what you're doing. You have to believe in what you're doing, and when you engage the other side and they see that sincerity and truthfulness in you, then you're able to win their trust. So I think that if you don't go across to them with an ulterior motive, but you go because you genuinely love them and you genuinely desire peace, not just for yourself or your side or your faith, but for the other faith as well. I think that goes a long way to winning their hearts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Good evening. Thank you for that wonderful, inspiring presentation. My name is Renu, and I'm from India, and I'm a Mason Fellow, mid-career student here at the Harvard Kennedy School. My question is to Thin Aung. After 23 years, you are almost there at the door of democracy. Almost. Because the next election will decide if democracy has actually finally come in Burma. Do you think that you will have full democracy in the next election? What are your thoughts? Thank you.
Well, I think in my mind, what I'm thinking is not only election is democracy, because democracy is not complete only with the elections. So democracy is a process and value we have to work for the whole the time. So of course the 2015 elections, we hope that will be free and fair elections, but we are not sure. This is 50-50s because the situation we are now seeing is that the ruling government and also military they are not willing to release the power. They still want to control with some kind of the tricky ways. So we see this situation so that Aung San Suu Kyi and also democratic forces are trying to amend the constitution before the elections. So if that happens, a free and fair election, then we will see some kind of democracy flourishing. But I don't think that complete democracy will be restored that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Aung San Suu Kyi was here. She spoke at the forum, and it's the kind of thing where I remember where I sat, and I think, and I will remember that, to my dying day. Just seeing her at last outside, able to come out, but she paid a price similar to yours. I mean, in terms of you not going back as your mother was dying, and her not leaving to come being with her husband as he was dying outside of Burma. Yeah, what tough decisions. But you are strong. Where do you think I am? Yes, I think I'm over here, yes.
I'm Alice, and I've been in Swanee's class for the last week and a half. We've talked a lot about women building peace, and in that context, Tintin, I was struck when you said that you decided to take up arms in Myanmar. And I'm interested to hear from you and from you, Amal, about that choice when faced with oppression to work peacefully or to take up arms. And I'm interested in whether you think men and women think differently about that decision.
Yeah, and Jacqueline, I don't know if you have experience. I know you don't talk a lot about earlier years, or Martha, any of you who made a decision to support an armed revolution. Any of you.
Actually, that time in 1988, I was about 20 years old and full of, that energy to take, adventurous, and also I was ready to give up my life for the revolution. So that's why I decided to join armed struggles. So of course, after many years, and also I see the world full of wars in other part of the world. Then I said the armed struggle is not ending. I mean, that's war. So we cannot get peace only with this armed fighting. So that now changed to my is non-violent way. I follow the Aung San Suu Kyi with non-violent way of fighting against injustice and to restore democracy in my country. So that is my change of position.
I would
please.
myself.
Yeah.
I would say that I have not lived in times where I was compelled to make a decision towards armed struggle. But when I read history and see what is happening around the world, I want to be non-judgmental and to know that there are circumstances that can force you to go to armed struggle. My forefathers and mothers had to take armed struggle to get freedom from the colonial masters. You look at situations and you realize that there's times people are left without much option. But wherever it is possible, one has a duty to advocate for peaceful resolution of conflicts.
I think I want to agree with you because it depends very much on the circumstances. There's not an absolute, a woman will never take arms. But I think that depending on the circumstances, on the democratic struggle, you have groups acting very differently. You have groups that have taken the decision to take on arms, but you do have groups that will only help them, and you have groups that will be doing the conscience rising work. And so it's really very complex, the kind of alternatives that you have to put together in order to have a resistance. And I think that it is a very difficult, very, very difficult decision to take on arms. Many friends of mine have taken on arms. Many are dead because of that decision. But it is a decision that in certain circumstances you can understand, and as she said, are the only resource or are valid, but they are not unique. And so when we see terror today, when we see the horror of how arms are being used, it really saying, let's give peace a chance by negotiation, by convincing, by denouncing, by being strong, but not necessarily by killing others.
Yeah. So I think what they're saying then, if I may, is that as women, these particular women who spoke would not say never. There are moments when shockingly, military intervention is the least violent response. Those times are very, very few, and they represent a failure in diplomacy, a failure of so much of the peace education or the peace organizing, etc. And they're tragic moments when you have to use arms. And that may be some of the difference, that there isn't an automatic thought of, here's the evil, I will attack, but rather it comes farther down the road as a tragic choice. We're going to end this now. I'm so sorry. You're going to have to ask your question separately, because I'm going to ask Esther if she will come, and I believe there's a music stand here to come with you. And if you would provide us the last word here, Esther, would you please bring it? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, all. My name is Esther Ibanga, and I've pastored a church in Jos Plateau State for the past 20 years. I'm also the founder and leader of Women Without Walls Initiative, a coalition of different ethnic and interfaith women's group that we formed 4 years ago. to address the incessant ethno-religious conflicts that have rocked my state since 1994, with thousands of people losing their lives senselessly. Following the killings of Christians in the region, I've had to overcome my fear and anger and get out of my comfortable, safe, and uninvolved life to lead a protest march of about 100,000 women. My Muslim counterpart also organized Muslim women to protest the killings of Muslims in our state. In spite of the two rallies, the killings continued. So we decided to come together to fight a common cause, as the issues we found out were not religious but political. Religion was used as a powerful tool. Together, we led the rally for the release of the Chibok girls that were abducted by Boko Haram. But let me go back to the beginning. I was born into a family of 10, 8 girls and 2 boys. At a time when my culture and tradition viewed having a girl as not only unfortunate, but having 8 girls was like a disease. And nobody would waste his resources to send girls to school. But my father was an exceptional and a godly man that lived way ahead of his time and would tell us, his girls, don't ever think any male is better than you just because you're girls. You are the best and can be anything you want. And so from his meager policeman's salary, my father sent us to school against the better judgment of his family and peers. Unfortunately, he died when I was 11. But my mother, even though illiterate but educated, continued the legacy my father left her. So I went to school and got my master's in business administration and worked in Central Bank of Nigeria for 16 years before retiring in 2001 to a full-time ministry. Pastoring a church, which again was something I was told I couldn't do, in a very traditional and religious city. I went ahead and did it anyway. The words of my father ringing in my ears. Over the years and in the history of Nigeria since the Civil War, and even to this day, men have been in the forefront of practically everything in my country. From politics to finance, from governance to the economy, and religion. And maybe that's why the problems have not only remained, but have been compounded over the years. And that is not to disregard the positive contributions of men in nation building. But maybe it's time to get a fresh perspective. And that's where the Nigerian woman must come in. We've seen from experience that the hard approach at conflict resolution has not always been the best approach. And I feel it is time to adopt the soft approach through women who are more empathetic and insightful in solving problems than a short-term, immediate, high-handed military approach. I believe that women are more compassionate in dealing with an erring son or daughter, are less political or ambitious, and less corrupt to pervert justice. It's been an amazing 3 days of meeting ordinary women doing extraordinary work, like one of my sisters at this colloquium said. These are women from all over the world battling war from the front lines, whether in our homes or communities, or in our nations as a whole. We cannot but salute the resilience and courage of these women, who against great odds have refused to keep quiet or even maintain the status quo. Women have earned the right to be included in peace building and security, since they are included in a war against their wishes. They deserve to have their voices heard. I'd lived in a society that defined me that defined for me what I could or could not do strictly on a gender basis. But I had to define for myself, first of all, as a human being with a God-given free will to decide what I could or could not do. And this subsequently meant crossing the lines to be educated, crossing the lines to pastor a church, crossing the lines to engage Muslims, crossing the lines to engage security, traditional and religious leaders from both sides of the divide. A few years ago, at the height of the ethno-religious crisis in my city, the house my mother had lived in for 35 years was burned to the ground. I grew up in that house. Years of memories were made there. Pictures and other mementos were suddenly destroyed. It was devastating, and I was heartbroken and overwhelmed with anger. So I had a journey to make, a journey of forgiveness. I asked God to heal my heart. It wasn't immediate, but eventually I came to that point where I could truly look at Muslims in the eye with a forgiving heart and truly love them. Only then could I reach out and do the work I'm doing today. God created us all different and unique, tall and short, black and white, male and female, to contribute to the world the uniqueness of who we are, and not to destroy because we are not like the other. But this is not just my journey, it's a journey for all of us. And I challenge you all to have the courage to take the first step towards that journey. Thank you so very much for being here. May God bless you and keep you. May God cause his face to shine upon you and give you peace. Good night. Thank you.